Just while you're moving back in, oh wow, reverberation. There's a bit of digital interactivity in this presentation. I'm guessing most of you have smartphones or laptops. What you can start by doing is going on that website, which is called menti.com. You just tap that in, and then they'll ask you for a code, which is 610626, so you can put that one in. And then that will basically allow us to interact digitally on a couple of questions. The first slide I've put up and that you will find on the Menti site is, it's basically a link towards my presentation. So if you copy paste that and then put it onto your laptop or onto your iPhone, you'll get onto my Google Drive, and then you'll have immediate access to my slides if you want to do that. And if not, of course, via the course, then I guess you'll get the PDF. But so, I'll give you a couple of minutes just to, well, not less than that, a minute to hook up to the Menti site. And we'll come back to that later on. So even if you're not on it yet, then we can enter it after. So am I right in guessing that most of you are on the EduRoam Wi-Fi and you all have access, or at least part of you have access to the web? Is that correct? Yeah, super. Okay. But for those of you who wouldn't have entered that yet, you'll have another opportunity a bit later on. So, off to my presentation. So, yeah, as you probably saw from today's program, I'm basically going to talk about career planning in childhood disability. Well, why did I get this subject? Maybe just tell you a bit about who I am. Well, Giovanni said it a bit earlier, but I'm basically a physician. I'm a pediatrician to start with, trained as a pediatrician, then specialized in pediatric rehabilitation between Switzerland and Ireland in Dublin. And now I've been basically in charge of the rehabilitation unit in Lausanne University Hospital for the last 13 years, progressing up the ladder progressively. I'm 46 years old. I have two boys, 8 and 12 years old, a wife who's a pediatrician as well, but she's in a private practice. Just so you know a bit about me, because I'm going to be asking you a bit about yourselves, so that we all feel comfortable. So we're going to be talking about hard skills and soft skills, a bit more about that later on. So, as you probably will have understood, please feel free to interrupt, to interact. There are no good or bad questions, especially for a theme like this one. It's probably going to be one of the least scientific presentations that you've had during the whole week, but hopefully it will prove useful. So yeah, you have my different affiliations: Lausanne University Hospital, the Lausanne University Faculty of Medicine, where I'm senior lecturer, the EACD, where I'm chief of the scientific committee. I sit on the board of several either professional organizations or not-for-profit organizations. We'll maybe talk about the interest of that later on. So what would I like you to go home with at the end of this presentation? The first thing is that if you're able to identify, I'd say, the challenges and the facilitators that you'll be able to find along the way when moving ahead in your career in childhood disability research, then that would already be a success for me. It's part of my title, talking about hard skills and soft skills. You'll see what the importance and the relative importance of these are. And finally, there is the idea of a bit of introspection. If you're able to, either during my lecture or after that, self-reflect on your own abilities, your own needs in terms of moving forward in what you're doing now, then again, I'd be very happy about that. So, what does a career in clinical research look like? Well, this is academic research related to a university or a high school, I'd say a higher education school. So basically in academia, you start out as a student and then you move along to the stage of doctoral student, and I guess a part of you at least are at that stage. Certain of them are then going to move on to the postdoctoral status and become lecturers as well. And finally, when you continue moving up the ladder, then you arrive to the professorial positions. And yeah, that all looks very linear and straightforward, but as you probably have experimented already, it isn't always that smooth. In parallel, and what does sometimes make things a bit more complicated is that when we work in this type of field, it's the exception when you do pure research. A majority of us actually have to do research on one side, research and teaching, because those are, I'd say, the two main arms of academia. But a lot of us also have to provide services, typically clinical services as physicians, as therapists. And again, you have your own track, and yes, you start off as a student, then you move on to become a junior professional, start taking on responsibilities, then you move up the ladder, you become a mid-stage professional, you often start taking on managerial roles as well, and again you advance and then you become a senior professional, senior management, etc. Again, on this slide, it looks very much as if they run in parallel and synchronously, and that isn't always the case. Sometimes you're going to be able to progress faster on one side than on another. You won't always have the same opportunities on both sides. And yeah, navigating between those two arms of your career is, I'd say, sometimes a part of the challenge. And again, just to say, it is clearly not linear. It seems nice and smooth, but basically it has its ups, it has its plateaus, it has its downs, it has its interruptions. And there's no good or bad career, basically. I mean, there are basically life stories of each and all of us. And that's what it basically is. It is a lifetime journey. When you have that aspiration to work with children who have disabilities and to help that community with your research, you're basically embarking on a journey, knowing probably more or less where you're going, but you don't know what all of the steps and the contrary and pro winds are going to be along the way. Again, well, I mean, if you want to, we can exchange a bit more later on our individual, I'd say, pathways and journeys, knowing that I'm probably a bit at a later stage than you are. So, first question. So this is where we're going to start interacting electronically. So, if you have your smartphone. So for those who joined us late, you can go up onto this website called menti.com and use this code, which is 610626, and then you're going to end up on basically a window which is going to ask you to put in three words that are going to describe your main challenges to pursuing a research career. Does it work? I hope it does. It should show up here if it does. So for respondents, I can see how many of you are actually taking part. That's the little number at the bottom right. I had a few more of you take part before. So this is basically word cloud. A word cloud is going to weight the number of times the word was said in terms of frequency. And this is basically going to show us what challenges you encounter. Interesting. Let's go up to 20 and then I'll start commenting. And you can continue taking part. Okay. So, very visibly, the time issue, that is probably freeing up enough not spare time, but available time to pursue your research aspirations. That is, I'd say, one of the one of the challenges. We'll go into that a bit later, see what the literature basically says about that. And yeah, it's not for nothing that we asked Miklos to come and talk about funding this morning, because it is true. Basically, finding finances to support your research is an issue when you're doing research, especially early in your career. Basically, your professional activity rests completely, or at least in big part, on the funding that you're able to get from outside your own institution. And yeah, so research versus clinical time, money, mentorship, good. We're going to talk about mentorship a bit later on. Hierarchy, moving around within the organization, governance system, country aspects, networking, supervision, patience, yeah, that's right. You do have to be patient. I completely agree. So yeah, all of those are, and yeah, team issues, curiosity, ideas, having great research ideas, finding the right research institute, finding a position, all of those are absolutely, I'd say, true, legitimate, and experienced challenges. So thanks a lot for that. We'll be back to interactive questions a bit later on. So, now that you've answered the question, what are the challenges that you can actually identify when you read about it? Probably starting off early on, but even when you progress within your first few years, the lack of clear information on how academia actually works as a career option is a challenge. And at least in certain areas, it does tend to be a bit secretive. That is, how do you actually progress? Who do you have to get in touch with to move forward? Where do you get the right supports? What can I expect within 5, 10, 15, 20 years? The legibility of the system is not always fantastic. One of them is, again, early on in your career, is that basically you have to build up competency. And competency in conducting scholarly research, it's not always that easy to get access to that type of learning, if not purely experiential learning. And that is probably one of the positive aspects of a summer school such as this. It is that, yeah, you're allowed to take time a week to basically concentrate on how do you actually do scholarly research. Moving up the ladder, as I said, that there are challenges and there are potential obstacles there. I already said that it could be a bit felt, at least, as a bit secretive. There is sometimes, depending on which institutions, countries you are, a bit of lack of transparencies about what the policies are in terms of promoting, what the exact procedures are. It's sometimes considered, and we'll come back quickly to the issue of I'd say, inclusiveness and equality within research careers, but it has been considered a bit of a good old boys club. And the fact is that when you actually look at the criteria that are used by a lot of universities to promote research, it concentrates very much on the research aspect and not as much on the teaching, the mentoring, and the services, which often take up most of the time of your professional activity. Yeah?
I also have a question about the general picture in Europe, how much you look at quantity, like how many research papers, and like the content, because I think all of us in this field knows that it can take some time.
Absolutely.
And other research might be quite a lot faster.
It's an excellent question, and actually I'm coming to that on the next slide, because yeah, no, that is a genuine concern. That is how do you actually value research activity? How do you measure it? And is it completely measurable? That is clearly an issue. For those of you who'd like to look a bit more into those challenges, I've actually put in this citation, which concentrates in basically academic careers in the field of internal medicine, but it applies pretty well, I'd say, to other fields as well. So that's, I'd say, a good article to look into. But those aren't the only challenges. Financial concerns and uncertainty, I mean, they were up there on the word cloud. Definitely, it's not only difficult actually to get the funding, but the uncertainty with not knowing whether in a year's time, 2 years' time, 3 years' time, my position is still going to be there because I am dependent on those external funds. That does certainly put a certain, if not a big amount of pressure, especially on younger professionals. The limited number of actually permanent research positions, that is another issue. It is a bit of a pyramid. That is, you have your mainstay of doctoral researchers, then there's a filter, you get up to the postdoc level, and then when you really want to get up later into your career to the professorial positions, again, there's always that filter along the way, and to actually accede to those small numbers of research positions which are financed by the faculties. It is a struggle, it is a challenge, and that's why you also have to keep your mind open in terms of career planning and think about solutions A and solution Bs. Back to your question, how do you actually value the research output? So it is true that up till today, and despite what a lot of universities have said, the bibliomics, as you would talk about genomics or proteomics, is a big part of that. That is, the main quantifier of research activity is up till now, basically your bibliographic output. We'll talk about a bit later on about strategies actually to try to attune that and to optimize the use of your time to actually increase your yield in terms of publishing, because there is that notion of publish or perish. That is basically if you don't have X number of papers per year, second year, 3 years, etc., then that is going to basically hold you back in progressing. And that, I mean, it is a real issue. I think as researchers, we're all confronted with that. Some universities are starting to think about different ways of doing it. It's always, I'd say, concentrated on, the bibliography part of it is always there, but typically the ponderation of impact factors. My university in Lausanne last year decided to remove impact factors completely from the ponderation, because it's not because you're in a high-ranking journal that you're not a good researcher and that you're not going to have an impact on your community. So, I mean, people are thinking about that. I think people are very conscious that it only gives you a partial view of what a researcher actually does. But it is true that it does remain up till now one of the rare, very measurable quantities that you do have when you're judging a research career. There is the issue of inequalities. Well, we're probably, I'd say, relatively lucky to be in a field because of the way the professional body is constructed where, women representation is good, but even if you look at the program of this week, I actually looked at it yesterday evening, and we had, I think, you had 3 women speakers throughout the week versus, I don't know, 7 or 8 men. And that is not representative of what happens in the field. I mean, if you look at this room, the proportions are completely inversed. And again, I think universities, institutions are more and more aware of that, are more and more aware of the challenges that go with, leading a successful academic career and being a woman, with, the challenges of maternity, family life, finding a work-life non-work life balance, and they are starting to put in, at least for a number of them, a number of, I'd say, measures or incentives to improve access to academic careers to women, but that glass ceiling effect has not been completely resolved up till now. Again, coming back to my university and looking at the medical faculty specifically, we now have In terms of graduate students, we have 60% of women and 40% of men, but if you look at the professors, we have 20% of women and 80% of men. It has moved up a bit over the last 5 years. It's moved up by 5%, so hopefully that trend will continue. But yeah, that clearly has to be worked on. And yeah, all of this does have this impact on work, non-work-life balance. It can lead to fatigue, it can lead to stress. So yeah, again, I mean, going into that type of career comes with its challenges. But again, there's also all of the positive and interesting parts that go with it in terms of enthusiasm, etc. So this has actually been modelized. There are at least 2 papers which have modeled what a research career can look like. The first one of them is this one. It's a nice paper that was based. It's a qualitative research. We talked about qualitative research, I think, on Tuesday, where they interviewed, I think, 60 postdocs in terms of how they negotiated a career in academic medicine. And basically, I mean, it's maybe a bit loaded, and you can look into that later on. But what you have to balance is basically why are you, sorry, yeah. Is this, oh, yeah, no, not. Why are you doing this job? This is what they call the raison d'être. So it's medical doctors, but again, it applies to other professionals. That is, basically, why am I doing this? What are my profound motivations? What are my goals? And you have to balance that with what they call the second shift. That is, your first shift is what you do at work, but then when you get back home, you still have basically activities that are awaiting. You have to, cope with your wife, husband, children, other activities, leisure, etc. And finding that balance is, of course, a big part of negotiating your career in academic medicine. And then again, down here, there are basically factors that can contribute to a balanced life. Typically things like controlling your time schedule, the support you can get, mentorship. Again, I'll be coming back to that. And on the other side, the negative aspects, the resistance of the institutions, all of the negative comments that you can get, the lack of respect, the uncertainty. Again, the uncertainty of the research career and of the financing is one probably of the big stressors that you do get early on in your career and that you actually do continue to experience for a while. Another article which had another look at modelizing a research career was this one, and it's actually a fun article for those of you who like mechanistic views of life. It's basically about the physics of an academic career, and they put an academic career into equations. So this is basically one of the tables, one of the figures out of the article. I'm not going to go through all of the details, but it's a fun article to read, so I'd really encourage you to have a look at it. But yeah, basically what you can see that there are things like distance, that is basically you have to hold the distance to achieve your goals. There's the question of influence, what is the influence that you can have in your environment? Stress is there, of course. The momentum, basically building up your career, getting momentum, and again, the balance between basically, work and non-work life, and the question of synergism, which is basically the collaborations that you can build up to move ahead. So I mean, behind that pretty abrupt figure, there's a very nicely written article for those of you who are interested. So, second question. So back to Mentimeter. So, we're going to talk about, so that's me just testing, I did not top you up, so those will disappear. I should have, I should have cleared that, but yeah. So, name 3 qualities of good researcher, because that's what we're going to go into next. We're going to start talking about qualities and skills. So what, for you, would be 3 important qualities as a researcher? So again, I'll let it go up to around the 20s, and then I'll start commenting. Good, excellent, super. So you can continue, for those of you who haven't taken part yet. And it's interesting, you'll see that my next slide is actually a word cloud, which I extracted from different websites and different articles which talk about the qualities of a researcher. And it will be interesting actually to confront your view with their view. I'll let you discover a bit later on what that actually shows. But yeah, motivation, definitely, and curiosity are big parts of basically being a researcher. If you're not curious, then you don't research. That means, I mean, if you fundamentally want to understand what things are and how they work and how you can improve, then basically that curiosity has to be there. So those are, I'd say, intrinsic qualities. The critical thinking, the competency, of course. I mean, you can have all of the motivation, the curiosity you want. If the more scientific hard skills aren't there, then it is, of course, difficult to progress. Innovation is there. Patience, yeah, patience definitely. Research takes time. Knowledge, yeah, it is a process of building up knowledge. I can see hard worker, definitely. Organizational skills, analytic reasoning, being a team person. There are also all of those aspects of collaborating. Pedantic, that's interesting. I don't know if that's a quality. Probably we could discuss that later on. But yeah, flexible, patience, humility, being clever, ethic, yeah. Excellent, okay, so thanks for your views. We'll now move on to the views of what you actually find again on, so this is basically very unscientific. I basically went through different websites talking about researcher qualities and different articles, and I copy-pasted a lot of the words that I found, and this is basically the word cloud that came out. And you'll probably recognize a number of the things that we saw on that previous slide. The one that comes first and foremost, and you said it, and it came first and foremost, and actually, I think, your slide, just in front of motivation, is curiosity, sorry. Yeah, so curiosity, definitely, that is probably one, I'd say, of the driving qualities of a researcher or a scientist. The passion aspect goes kind of with that, maybe, but it's something different. I mean, the passion is basically you're enthralled by what you're doing. The curiosity is that willingness to want to understand. Tenacity, yeah, you basically have to hold on to the ride to be able to, yeah, go the length of the way. You have to be resilient, basically accept that things sometimes work and that often they don't work the way you expected. Precise, being autonomous, independent, creative, open, to be a learner, to be methodical, to be honest. Which ones are there? Skeptical as well, that probably comes with, yeah, scientific inquisitiveness. Don't believe what you're being said first time around. I mean, you really have to go into the depth of things. Being rigorous, committed, integrity is there as well. So yeah, and ambition, all of those things are in there. Does this mean that we actually have a map of what a great researcher actually is? So this is another slide which I got on the website of Nature. Nature journals run master classes for researchers, and this is one of their slides on what a great researcher actually is. And this is what we'd all love to be. We'd all love to have fantastic scientific ideas, be great communicators, write impeccably, be good grant writers, and that would be fantastic to get more money, be a good mentor, a good peer reviewer, have excellent experimental designs, an excellent knowledge of the literature, be a good collaborator. I mean, this is basically the jigsaw puzzle of the ideal researcher. But does that ideal researcher actually exist? I'm not sure. So what are actually the right and absolutely necessary qualities of a researcher? I think there probably is no ideal or optimal researcher or scientist, as there is no ideal or optimal human being. I mean, the variety that we have, the variety of people that you actually get to meet in academia, as well as in any other field of life, is probably part of what actually makes the thing that rich and interesting. You can basically call them a pretty heterogeneous bunch. So I hope this works. Is there actually sound? If I put a video, will the sound come out? I'll try. It should. Let's try. So, is there sound? So I'll tell you who he is after. Oh, yeah, sorry, it doesn't. So if I come back, do I have to push on a button or?
That's good.
Okay, yeah. Oh, it's here, yeah, okay, super. So, what's that happening? Have I killed the computer? Anula. Oh yeah, there you are. That's, oh, no. Oh, it doesn't want to put the sound back on. Oh, maybe up here.
No.
Ah, there you are. So basically, as that is trying to load, you'll see, I'll give you the link right after on the slide. It's an interesting website. Well, it's sponsored by AstraZeneca, but that's probably secondary. But what it is since approximately 5 or 6 years, they have this Nobel Inspiration Initiative, which is going on, where basically twice a year they run workshops around the world with young researchers where Nobel Prize awardees come and speak about their own careers, about their own challenges. And there's basically a whole set of, so I think it's not going to... Oh, it's okay. No, I'll let you go and have a look at yourselves on the internet. But basically, these are different interviews of Nobel Prize award recipients who talk about the successes and challenges that they had along the way. So this one actually, which you can find on YouTube under the title "The Importance of Taking Radio Sets Apart," is from Tim Hunt, who was the medicine and physiology recipient of the Nobel Prize in 2001 for his research on phosphatase kinase and its role in cell metabolism. But he's a very funny guy, and actually he has that, a pretty nice description of that. Again, what I was saying before of how actually rich and interesting it is to have that heterogeneous bunch of people doing academic research. So yeah, for those of you who would, there we are. So yeah, for those of you who would actually like to go and navigate that website, it's called nobelprizii.org, and it's a good thing to look into. So those were for the qualities, and qualities I'd say are kind of intrinsic to us, or at least to a certain extent. Now, if we talk about competencies and skills, we're going to go closer to what my title was, which was basically the question of hard skills and soft skills. So hard skills are basically those abilities which you can teach someone, which you can measure. They're often pretty technical, and they are necessary for the achievement of professional tasks. So I guess you're kind of getting the idea of what those could be. So if you actually wonder about what hard skills are useful in clinical research, what would you say? What hard skills do you need as a clinical researcher? I didn't have enough slides available, so I have to do this orally. So feel free, go ahead. Sorry? Statistics, absolutely, statistics is a part of it. True, that's a hard skill which is certainly necessary to the majority, if not all of us. Yeah, that's true. Methodology, absolutely, correct as well. Yeah. Yeah, measurements, correct. So basically, if you look at the way that hard skills are, break down in a clinical research career, there are a certain number of generic, I'd say, abilities which are useful throughout. That is, whether you're doing, I'd say, research on a therapeutic intervention, or you're doing more fundamental research on understanding differences between two populations, I mean, these skills are probably useful throughout. Then there are skills which are very much project related, and typically knowing how to devise a certain type of therapy could be part of that. Developing knowledge of a certain type of measurement would also be part of that. For example, knowing how to use the AHA or the Schoool or the Melbourne upper limb assessment if you're looking into upper limb function in children with hemiplegia. There are certain projects which are actually going to require very technical knowledge in terms of brain imaging, neurophysiological testing, etc., etc. So those are basically skills that you build up along the way depending on the projects that you're exposed to. Sometimes you do get a certain amount of knowledge as a pre-graduate student, but often it is very much experiential and related to what you do in the field. And then coming back to what I said earlier, there are some generic hard skills which are useful throughout, and two of them at least were mentioned. It's the methodology aspect of it and the statistics. Going into those different aspects. So research methodology, and that was probably a big part of what you actually were exposed to earlier this week. That is, depending on my experimental design, what type of research method, or not even the research design, but depending on my research question, what is going to be my research design and how I'm going to build up the method to actually get there. And I'd say a good knowledge in research methodology is certainly something very useful. It's not always well taught, or if not well taught at all at a pre-graduate level. And then the opportunities that you do get as a postgrad, you basically have to go looking for the right, I'd say the right teaching, the right places, and that is not always easy. To give you an example of what I did, and it was a bit unexpected, but that's the way I got to build up my knowledge in research methodology. Early on in my career, when I'd done my three first years as a pediatrician, initially I wanted to go into infectious diseases. So I went off to Bangkok for a year to do a master's in clinical tropical medicine. And within that master's program, we actually had 2 months a very, very basic and a very strong teaching in research methodology. So I've completely changed my orientation, but what I actually learned there in terms as a postgraduate student was extremely useful and up till now serves me. So if you do have that opportunity along the way to take time to learn about research methodology, that is clearly an excellent investment. Something which is, I'd say, relatively closely related, and Miklos touched upon that earlier on. It is becoming, I'd say, more and more important, especially when you go into grant applications. It's the question of data management. As you probably have seen in a couple of the slides that he has shown, there are now requirements in terms of open access, not only to manuscripts, but also to data, which mean that you do you have to have at least basic knowledge on data management. And again, that can be instructed within research methodology courses. Some of the more recent courses do integrate things about data management, but sometimes if you haven't been exposed to that, then you must look into that subject. It is clearly becoming, I would say, more and more important, especially when you have access to very large data sets, also in terms of data protection, managing anonymity, and again, opening up your data to the general public. If you, again, have those opportunities to learn about data management, that can certainly prove useful. Biostatistics. When you do research, quantitative research especially, you can't do that without having at least some basic knowledge of statistics. And if you only have basic knowledge, then that means that you will have to get help from a statistician. But yeah, I mean, how those tests work, what they mean, what type of data sets use different statistics on, definitely not only for doing your own research, but for understanding the research that others do as well. I mean, being able to judge of the quality of a paper based on what statistics were used, were they appropriate regarding the data set, was it normal or not normal, etc. Some knowledge there is definitely, I'd say, necessary. So those are very, I'd say, hard skills. Another one which is pretty hard is scientific writing. And again, it's true that in the scientific field, everything is done in English. I'm lucky enough to have, well, learned English very early on in my life, since I was born in the UK. But it is, of course, I mean, communicating and especially writing in English, when it isn't your mother tongue, does require a considerable amount of effort, tenacity, but definitely, and there are courses there. I mean, there are online courses, there are presential courses on scientific writing. That is certainly, I would say, one aspect that is worth investing in. If you can do a scientific writing course, that certainly can prove, I'd say, very useful. I guess with Bernard Dan yesterday, he gave you also some information about on that, what are the criteria for publishing a paper, etc. But you can really work on your scientific writing skills with dedicated courses. The last generic hard skill, I actually hesitated between putting it in a hard skill or a soft skill, but for me it's a hard skill. That's the one. It's public speaking. It can prove challenging. Not everyone seems comfortable with public speaking, and that's absolutely natural. But if you're going to build up, your career, teamwork, a network, get to be known by others nationally and internationally, then there's no way of doing without it. And again, public speaking, I said, I was hesitating between a soft skill and a hard skill, but it is a hard skill. I mean, it is measurable, it is learnable. I mean, even people who are not confident with speaking in front of others, I mean, there are courses where you can actually learn that, to manage your stress, to manage how you speak, and definitely, again, if there is something that you have the opportunity to invest in, public speaking teaching, if it's not something that you're comfortable with, can definitely come in very useful, because one of the places where you do lots of networking is in national and international congresses, and where the way you get most visible within those meetings is when you basically address the public in oral communication sessions, and that's where you can also have an impact. That's where people hear you and say, oh wow, that's a person who spoke well, and what he said was interesting, and I'd like to get to know that person. And that can basically be the start of a beautiful new story. So yeah, definitely worthwhile investing in. Before I move on to soft skills, any questions or comments on hard skills? No? Okay. So, what are soft skills? It's a soft definition as well. They're not that easy to define. So actually, I was thinking about how I was going to write up that slide, and basically I came up to something very simple. I went back to the dictionary. So this is basically the Collins definition of what soft skills are. So soft skills, I'm going to read that out, are desirable qualities for certain forms of employment that do not depend on acquired knowledge. And, well, we'll rediscuss that a bit later on. They include things such as common sense, the ability to deal with people, and a positive, flexible attitude. Now, if you go onto the internet and you tap in soft skills and research, or soft skills and career, you're going to find loads and loads of websites. It's very popular for managers and in management. I'll come back to that later in terms of nurturing or even learning to improve your soft skills. But yeah, there's a lot to be said about the usefulness of soft skills in all types of careers, actually. There's actually very literature related to research careers on the impact of soft skills. But there, again, this is a nice paper that was published a couple of years ago, where they basically interviewed I think it was around 40 senior researchers about what soft skills they thought were basically necessary or useful within a research career. So I'm not going, of course, to read through that whole slide. You'll have access to it. But basically, if you look on the left-hand side, these are the soft skills that they listed. Building external relationships, what you would call networking. Cultural diversity awareness, that's certainly something important. Emotional intelligence, inspiring moral trust, inspiring competence-based trust, strategic thinking, emotional engagement, empowerment of others' talents, having initiative, being able to make decisions, resolve conflicts, be persuasive, resilient, flexible. These all sound like qualities. And yeah, it's interesting to see whether actually those senior managers, senior research leaders thought they were learnable or non-learnable. So these are a couple of figures from that same article. The first question that they asked, once they'd listed, I'd say, based on basically a peer group discussion, was how important are the following skills for effective collaboration within a team? One first interesting point is that if you actually look at not at all important, which is up here, there are very, very few of those soft skills which are used not at all important. That is, throughout, I'd say, the research experience, a vast majority of the senior researchers considered that soft skills are important, at least occasionally. The occasional values are here on the left-hand side, and typically things like decision-making, things like conflict resolution are considered occasionally important, and you can understand that. I mean, conflicts don't always arrive, so it's only occasionally that you have to use conflict resolution abilities. Same thing for decision. Depending on where you are in your career, you might not have that many or that high number of critical decisions to make. So it seems logical that actually they're considered occasionally important. But overall, what you can say is that soft skills, when you ask senior researchers, are considered as a main feature to succeed in a research career. They were then asked about how well they could assess soft skills when they considered candidates within a recruitment process, and around 2/3 of the leaders believed that they were able to assess that during a recruiting process. And that's probably quite false. If you actually look not at the medical literature, but at the management literature, it's very, very easy to get people wrong within a recruitment process regarding their soft skills. So that's basically exaggerated confidence. It is not easy when you're recruiting someone to basically judge one on whether they have good or bad soft skills. First impressions aren't always right. Now, this is an interesting figure. That is, are the following skills continuing traits of people's personalities or skills that can potentially be learned? If I come back to the Collins definition, it says that they were basically intrinsic qualities and something that wasn't amenable to be learned or moved. And as you can see here, a certain number of these soft skills are actually considered to be able to be learned to a considerable extent. Things such as networking, for example, empowering the talents of others, conflict resolution, inspiring trust, those are all considered as something that can, at least to a certain extent, be improved. Same thing down the line for decision making, for example. So again, they're not pure intrinsic qualities. There are things that can potentially be worked on. And yeah, a final question that isn't related directly to soft skills, but more to group dynamics. Are enjoyable collaborations also the most productive? Well, very, very clearly, and that won't come as a surprise to a majority of you. When you're happy within your team, and all team members are happy, of course, you're far more productive. So having basically fun at work and being with people that you enjoy being with. And yeah, if you just look at the measure of that, it was in terms of achieving project outcomes or publication and citation impact. So these weren't medical doctors. You probably understood that from the title of the journal, Trends in Ecology and Evolution. These were basically evolutionary scientists. But I'd say that if you were to ask the question to people within our field, probably the answers and responses would be pretty similar. So, what should we make of soft skills? So, what I would say that soft skills aren't that soft actually. When you look at that paper and you look at the management literature, actually soft skills are critical to moving ahead in a career. And actually, people have now renamed them. At least a certain number of authors have called them power skills. So, what I'd like you to keep there as a message is that, yeah, even if a number of them are maybe related to intrinsic qualities, a majority of them, even if they can't be completely learned, at least they can be nurtured, and you can progress on those soft skills, especially if you're aware of your potential weaknesses. And from that point of view, there is a big importance in the feedback you get from your other team members, but also from your mentors. And I think that brings me on to my next chapter, which is mentorship. Who has a mentor? Hands up. Okay, I would have expected, they're like that. Okay, so probably around, who has no mentor? Who doesn't have a mentor at this time? At this time, yeah. Okay, yeah. And a certain number of probably undetermined responses. So yeah, well, let's talk about mentors. Yeah. As a mentor.
So maybe
yeah. That's a very good point. I'll just repeat that. She has a supervisor, but she doesn't see her supervisor as a mentor. And I said that's a very good point. Because the question is, what is a mentor compared to a supervisor? So I don't know actually historically if you know where the term mentor came from, but mentor was written about in the Odyssey. And Mentor was the preceptor of the son of Ulysses, Telemach, for those who know Greek mythology. And so Telemach basically embarks on this journey to find Ulysses, who has disappeared on the Odyssey. And the person who actually mentored Telemach towards that was Mentor. That's the name of this person on the right-hand side here. This is Mentor. So yeah, to answer your question, is your supervisor a mentor? So what a mentor does is that he basically informally transmits knowledge, social capital, psychosocial support, which is relevant to your work, to your career, or to your professional development. And what it covers is informal communication, face-to-face, during a sustained period of time, between one person who's perceived as having the greater relevant knowledge, wisdom, or experience, and that is the mentor, and the other person who is perceived to have less, which is usually called the protégé, or more recently, the mentee. So I don't know if this answers your question, if your supervisor is a mentor or not. I have a few other examples of mentors in, I'd say, common mythology. And this is more contemporary mythology. I'd say that Master Yoda is a good example of a mentor. Because again, I mean, he has that genuine interest in what the learner is experiencing and on helping him basically to move forward. So yeah, a few of you don't have a mentor. So what would you actually look for in a mentor? As a person or in terms of qualities? Inspiration, absolutely, inspiration, yeah? Other things that you would like to look for in a mentor, if you could choose, yeah? Sorry? Support, yeah, absolutely, inspiration, support. Knowledge, yeah? Sorry? Availability, it's true, I can see the smiles, but it's true, I mean, yeah. I mean, you know what mentors and supervisor are like. They never have enough time, but no, definitely. I mean, even if their timetable is packed, I mean, a good mentor has to make time for his protégés. That's definitely part of it. So yeah, what you have to look for in a mentor. Again, these aren't general rules. I mean, these are just a few ideas that I'll let you think about. But yeah, definitely to have a real, genuine and true interest in seeing his or her protégés develop. That is probably one of the key aspects. A mentor who's only interested in himself and uses his protégés for his own progression is not a mentor. I mean, the idea of mentorship is that basically you're imparting upon someone younger the abilities, the competencies to move ahead. And of course, it's a give-give situation. I mean, the mentor does have to gain from having protégés, but it mustn't be unidirectional. That means that it's someone who does have to understand your goals and your expectations towards him or towards her. Of course, ideally, you do want to have someone who does already have a pretty good research status. That's in terms of networking. It's in terms of having a relatively good guarantee that your own career is going to move ahead, typically in terms of, getting your research to move forward, getting it published, etc. And looking basically at the bibliography and what your mentor has done before is something important. Integrity, definitely. I mean, you don't want to go choosing mentors who don't have, I would say, that quality. And again, getting in touch with the group or members of the group beforehand. If you have that opportunity, talking within your network to know, well, basically, how is this person? It is definitely something useful. Being an effective communicator, you could say, well, why is that? Basically, I could have a mentor who doesn't publicly communicate well, as long as he has time for me. But I would say it is useful, because often with effective communication comes the network, come the ideas, come the team leading aspect. So that's certainly a quality that I would encourage you to look for. And finally, remember that, I mean, you can give mentors a try and then at some stage change. That is, not all mentorships are destined for success, and you might not always get it right the first time. And your first mentor is clearly not always your last mentor. And this is basically a citation from an article on mentorship. Actually, when you look at the literature, scientific literature on mentorship, the usefulness of mentorship in terms of increasing your yield, etc., is not that well demonstrated. That is, if you look at the evidence-based mentorship, the evidence isn't that good, but that's probably also because it hasn't been looked at that much. On a personal level, I believe that it is something very useful. And myself, I had at least 4 mentors up till now. Just so to give you examples of what I found and looked for in these different people. Here on the left is when I started off my career, I was I did a year of pediatric surgery. And this person here is a pediatric surgeon, Blaise Mera, who's a senior lecturer in Lausanne University Hospital. And he started me off on my thesis, which was on interstitial cells of Cajal in the bowel of children with Hirschsprung's disease. So nothing to do with what I'm doing now. But basically what I got out from him was the passion for research. That is, he would basically come to the lab with me and look in the microscope up till 9, 10 in the evening, and we'd be going through histologic slides together. He taught me about integrity, because he had very good professional integrity. He taught me about persistence, because sometimes looking at those little cells and having colorations that didn't work and you had whole batches of slides that you had to put in the bin, well, basically to persist, that was something useful. So even if we didn't work ultimately in the same field, he was definitely someone important. Thierry Deona, who is the person up here on the light, Eliane Roulet, who are down here, they were successively the two basically professors in pediatric neurology in Lausanne. And again, I mean, they were we ended up finally doing quite different research. But along the road, they've always been guides. And we haven't used that word up till now, but I think guidance and being a guide is an important part of mentorship. And offering you support, I mean, the word support was said early on, and having that moral, but also factual support from a mentor is something I'd say essential. And down here, this is when I was in Ireland. This is Timothy O'Brien, who is an orthopedic surgeon and who is the head of the Gate Laboratory in Central Remedial Clinic, who sadly has passed away since then. But he had a very inquisitive mind. He was always challenging me in something. Sometimes, I mean, yeah, he went pretty hard on me regarding gait analysis. I did a few studies in the gait lab when I was over in Dublin. But again, I mean, that inquisitiveness, the skepticism, the critical thinking, that is something that I definitely took back from Tim O'Brien. So again, you shouldn't imagine a mentor as one person. I mean, you can get different types of mentorship from different people at different stages of your career. But they are definitely, I mean, these 4 people were all essential in what I am today. So mentors are a good part of it. We talked about soft skills, hard skills. Now there's a question of your subject. Well, most of you have already chosen your subject, of course, but that doesn't mean you have a bit of levity there to actually, reorient or think about what research questions you're going to go on to next. The first and foremost item is what inspires you, and that comes back to the essential qualities of a researcher, curiosity being the first one of them. If you're not curious about what you're doing, it won't work. So choose a subject that you're curious about, something that makes you basically want to get up in the morning and say, oh yeah, I'm going to go into my clinic, I'm going to go into my lab. Review the current literature, discuss your ideas with mentors, discuss your ideas with colleagues. I don't know which one of you talked yesterday evening at the party, but it was said, I mean, the importance of collaboration, not keeping things for yourselves. You can have this kind of protective reflex early on, thinking, oh, I had this great idea, but I want to protect it because it's mine, and I don't want the other one to get the same idea and move ahead of me. Of course, you mustn't be completely naive about this. I mean, it is a competitive field, and sometimes nasty things do go on. But overall, in the balance, you have much more to gain from exchanging and discussing and debating your ideas, because that's how you're going to basically improve your projects. So again, discuss the ideas that you have with your mentors, with your colleagues, and that's going to allow you to basically pinpoint the right subject. Coming back to the question of publications, do try to think realistically about productivity. I mean, you can have a great idea, but if your response is going to be in 10 years' time, for an early stage career, that is not going to work. You have to have something that is going to have a relatively short to mid-term yield in terms of publications. And there are diverse strategies to do that. You can publish protocols, you can publish review papers, you can have preliminary pilot studies and then bigger studies. So that there are strategies there to devise how you build up your subject to, I mean, as things move on, yield a certain number of more or less guaranteed publications. Which also means that there are advantages in not being too original to start with. Because if you think, oh, I have this great idea which is completely different from everything else that anyone else has done before, well, if you're right, then fantastic. But, as I said, in a research career, there are some successes and quite a lot of failures often. Experiments don't work, or they don't work the way you expected. So at least to start with, try to have a mixed portfolio. Try to aim for low-risk projects where you know that in any case, whatever happens, you'll have something interesting at the end. And yeah, maybe limit the number of high-risk projects that you're going to be working on. Yeah, coming back to this slide of the great researcher, I mean, yeah, fantastic. If you are, or if I was a great researcher, that would be great, but that's not all that there is to it, actually. When you think about it, a big part of research career is about opportunity. Of course, you can create opportunities, and creating opportunities comes through networking, comes through choosing the right mentor, comes through, yeah, basically exchanges, going to meetings, etc. Mustn't lie about it and be naive. Of course, there's a question of luck. Sometimes you're at the right place at the right time with the right person and snap, things work, and sometimes you're unlucky. And that's the reality of any type of work and of any type of career. And the final word is serendipity. I don't know if that's a notion that you're familiar with. I had to actually, it's talked about a lot, but it's not that easy a concept. Serendipity is basically when you embark on a voyage or a travel or an idea, and along the way things don't work out the way you thought they would, but then another idea comes up or another opportunity appears, and that's what serendipity is about. Probably the best historical example of serendipity is Christopher Columbus's discovery of America. He thought he was leaving off traveling towards the west to go to India, and finally he found a new continent, and that's an excellent example of serendipity. And if you're lucky along the way, you might have one of those serendipitous moments where, yeah, maybe you were aiming for something and suddenly something pops up to the left and to the right, and you slightly deviate, and this slight deviation, well, basically becomes the big thing in your career. So yeah, stay open-minded and catch the opportunities where you can. Organizational savvy. This is the thing that people often don't like to talk about, but I think it is essential. Knowing about organizations, knowing about who does what, when, how, knowing a bit basically about politics is an essential part, even if, yeah, we would like it to be otherwise, but it is an essential part of building up a career. It's true that lots of people actually think that organizational politics are for, yeah, it's basically having drinks after work and useless discussions, but that's not true. Often, I mean, the big decisions are not taken within the meeting rooms, the boardrooms, but they're taken outside. And it is important to have that attention to where actually the power is within your organizations, because if you're not attentive to that, you're not going to have any influence. And it is interesting because when you yield power correctly and you employ it constructively, that's where you do the best as a team. Again, it all seems very maybe abrupt and a bit harsh, but that's the reality of life, and it's the reality of human relations. I mean, politics are there. You have your interests, your mentors and supervisors have their interests, your institutions have their interests, and basically, you mustn't be naive to that. I mean, you're navigating within a system, and the better you understand the system, the better you're going to be able to continue the way that you decided to go. So there are strategies to actually develop your own political compass. The first one is build relationships, and that is at all levels of hierarchy. I mean, that it can be with your supervisor, it can be with a dean or a vice dean, it can be with students. Building up your network is a big part of understanding basically politics within an institution. You have to be resilient. Sometimes you'll be disappointed by people, and that's the reality of life, again, professional life, private life. But you have to learn from those disappointments. You have to learn from the surprises that come along the way. And yeah, try to keep an open dialogue attitude, even with the people that you don't like. And again, that's life. I mean, there are people that you like and people that you like less and people that you dislike. But that doesn't mean that you can't be talking together. So again, avoid abrupt communication, try to stay open-ended, and try to handle all the sensitive topics as they come along. It's sometimes, especially when you're more junior, it can be pretty impressing to say, oh, well, this is a very delicate subject that I don't want to broach with my hierarchy because I'm afraid of creating enmities within my team, etc. But if you let those things fester, then it just rots and things turn bad. It's when things aren't working within a team, do it as sensitively as you can, but try to talk about it, because yeah, if not, it will have a negative impact on your own progression. These are two interesting citations, probably one a bit more positive, one a bit more negative, but both I would say quite true. The first one is from Chade-Meng Ta, who is basically who used to be the head meditator of Google, but who basically, he's a Taoist Buddhist and also a computer programmer, and now he does lots of personal development, very expensive workshops. But he wrote a book, and this is actually interesting. He says, every organization has its own nervous system of connection and influence. accurate interpretation, and the ability to distinguish between self-interest, interest of one's department, and the interest of the overall organization depends on maintenance of a rich network. And again, it was said yesterday evening, that part of the networking and being in touch and being in contact is so essential to what you do in your profession. The second one I was saying is probably a bit more negative, but not that untrue, is being right is interesting, but it's often irrelevant. The book, if you see, is actually Winning in a World Where Hard Work and Talent Aren't Enough. And that's maybe the not so nice part of politics, but that's life. That's true. So again, political savvy and organizational savvy is something that will prove useful along the way. So I'm approaching the end of this presentation. So how about drawing a career plan from here? Well, you probably already do have one, or maybe not, and that's maybe not that important. But if you want to do that, basically the questions you have to ask are the following. First one is basically, who am I now and where am I? What skills do I have? And try to have, I'd say, a pretty objective and blunt approach to that. That is, where am I, because that's the only way you'll know where and how to go next. The second step is, the goals, is who do I want to be in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, 20 years' time, and to get there, what skills will I need to build up? And to build up those goals and to build up those skills, then you have to have means. And the big question there is, which experiences will get me there? So those can be working experiences, where you are, but it can also be abroad. Certainly that international experience in research and academic progression is always highly valued. Miklos talked about it earlier. There are specific European tools which allow you to have mobility, and certainly I would encourage you to be mobile if you have that possibility. There are a number of courses, workshops, you can visit clinics, labs for shorter stays, exchanges, collaborations. All of those can definitely prove useful along the way, but it's really the question of identifying the right means to get your goals. And coming back to what I talked about a bit earlier, the mentorship. One of the means to getting to your goals is choosing basically the right mentor or the right mentors. And have realistic timeline, back to reality. It's basically, as I said, where do I want to be? Well, 20 years' time is probably a bit too far, but if you have a 5-year plan, then that can be something which is definitely useful. And it's measurable. I mean, you can basically put down your SMART goals or your SMART objectives and measure your progression. So, one last question. And this is a slightly different format. Just go to full screen. So, sorry again. I was testing my system yesterday evening, so I didn't have time to. So eating spaghetti will not help you pursue research. But this is basically an open field question, so you can answer whatever you want. It's going to appear progressively on this slide. Again, I'll take your time, write your things down, and then I'll comment or not. We'll see. Super, excellent. So I think you're all going home with good ideas and good messages. What I see here is the importance of mentorship, the importance of the network, communicating. Of course, there are very realistic things such as the availability of positions. Balance between clinical and research time, coming back to what we said earlier on the challenges, basically be able to find that that balance. There was an interesting one that I saw go past. Supportive friendly team. That is definitely. I'm very blessed from that point of view. I have a small team, but they're all adorable, and we work well together. The time, the networks. I'd love that. That's the one. Elimination of hierarchical and bureaucratic steps, availability of funding and teamwork. I would love that if we could get rid of the hierarchical and bureaucratic steps, but the reality of the world is that hierarchies are there possibly for a good reason, and the bureaucracy is there possibly for a good reason as well, because they're basically they're systems which are there to, I'd say, ensure a certain degree of equity between teams and choosing the right projects to support, etc. But it's true that I'd say over the last decade or so, and that's something that I've experienced, it has become heavier and heavier in terms of administration. Submitting proposals has become something more complex. The challenge is there, but I think that's the system and the environment within which we live. Thanks a lot to all of you. That was super, and I can put that slide back up after if you want me to. Just to conclude. Am I back? No, sorry, I'm back the wrong slide. Yep, up. Yeah. This is the one. So this is just a nice view of Lausanne. That's where I work. If you come to Lausanne, come by and say hi. I'll be happy to see you. You have my email if you have any questions. You have my LinkedIn profile. Just a little teaser about this afternoon. So you're going to respond to a grand call. This is going to be a team, a little team simulation. How many of you are We'll see how many, 5 to 6 teams of, well, ideally 6, 5 to 6, I'd say. So it's a fictional grand call for the Pierre Suchard Foundation. I'll talk to you about Pierre Suchard later on this afternoon. But basically what we want to hear about is about a European collaboration from a multidisciplinary team who are going to get a grant of €500,000 for 2 to 4 years. I won't tell you what the subject is. You'll learn about that later on this afternoon. And so, until then, if you want to build up over lunchtime your dream teams, you're very welcome to do that, knowing that you have to be multinational and multidisciplinary. Those are the 2 criteria to enter the call. So you have an hour of lunchtime to basically build up your teams. I just want to see it. So 5, 7, 12, 19, 25, 29, 33, so you're still, 33 are still here. So we can do 6 teams of 5 to 6. Yeah. Any questions? I think if not, we're very Swiss. On time. So thanks a lot.